I have the good fortune of moderating this discussion between David Eisenbach, former Democratic candidate for New York City public advocate and Columbia University professor, on the left, and on the right, John Burnett, who is a very accomplished person in the financial sphere and also a former Republican candidate for New York City Controller. Gentlemen, how are you doing?
Doing well. I'm not a former Republican. I'm a former candidate.
I said former Republican candidate for New York City.
I'm only messing with you. I'm only messing with you on the words.
And let's see this green screen that John has acquired today. What is it? That's for the Empire Group. Okay, all right.
That's my company logo. You know.
Okay.
We're not in the studio, so I have to groom myself. I got a little comb.
All right, not bad, not bad. Okay. All right, gentlemen, let me jump right into it. Give me your thoughts on what we're seeing in terms of these protests, these riots, these demonstrations that are now going on their 8th day in response to the killing of Mr. Floyd. David, let me begin with you.
Well, there's a lot to unpack, so I'm just going to take one sliver of it. I'm very relieved as a historian that we have federalism, that Donald Trump is not in charge of police departments and state troopers, that we allow the governors to control what is criminal activity and not federal criminal activity. I thought his stunt involving the photo op and the use of force by federal security guards for the parks was completely out of line. And today, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, seems to agree with me that the President of the United States should not be in charge of police force, should not invoke the Insurrection Act.
And John, you're free to comment on the protests, demonstrations, or what David chose to focus on, which is the president's threat to use the Insurrection Act. Take it any which way you want. What's your take on what's happening?
I'd like to address both. You know, I'm not here to defend the president. However, you know, whether he comes out and actually make a call for peace and actually show himself, or whether there are reports for the bunker, no matter what happens, there are going to be complaints on the left and right. But the focus needs to be that we have looting, we have rioting, we have mass chaos and anarchy in our major cities. It's black, white, it's you name it, in the streets, causing chaos. In local communities at the city and state level seem to be not in control of this. Right. So yes, we do have federalism. However, you know, a part of what makes our republic great is the collaboration between the federal level and the local level. And Trump is right. If we cannot get this in order, right, because we're on the cusp of opening up. There's a reason why, you know, in terms of the racial issue, yes, that has been going on. It needs to stop. And a lot of people in the black community are fed up.
David, so we saw during the draft riots during the Civil War, President Lincoln order the military to New York City to quell those draft riots. Why shouldn't, if either the mayor or the governor are unable to get a hold of what's going on here in New York City, why shouldn't the president direct the military to get a hold of these riots so that the police could actually get back to policing the neighborhoods that they're normally policing on a regular basis? Because right now there's all sorts of regular patrols that are not being tended to. There's domestic violence calls that I think are probably taking a little bit more time to be responded to. Why not get a hold of these riots so that the police can be police again?
Because the riots haven't reached the threshold that would require the National Guard. The last time it was used, the Insurrection Act, was during the Rodney King riots. We're not at that level yet. Before that, it was Detroit, 1967, the riots after the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. We are not at those levels of riots. We have to be very, very cautious of allowing the President of the United States and the federal government to get involved in criminal justice matters and the use of force on our streets. So this is something that would set a terrible precedent.
In your judgment, and I want to move on to some other subjects here, but David, in your judgment, what would be the threshold? What would we need to see in terms of these riots? So far, I think we're at 4 cops shot so far, countless police officers in New York City with concussions and teeth knocked out. So far, at least 1 police vehicle that's been firebombed. In your judgment, what would be the threshold of when we should bring in the military to help the police get a hold of these riots?
Well, I think that the biggest threshold is if the mayor and governor agree that it should be done. And that is not the case right now. So until we actually have in the New York State a decision on the part of our leadership to call upon the federal government, invite them in, the federal government should not force anybody's hand here.
John, can I just make a quick point? Let me make a quick point here. You know, we don't need to go back to the 1800s. Okay, so for the last 20 years, the Army has been undergoing training to handle not foreign, but civil disobedience and unrest. As late as 2014, the training manual was updated, even under Obama, that trains Army enlisted officers to actually come into local communities when there is mass civil unrest.
All right, I want to move on to a couple of other issues while we have you here. John, tell me politically, and I know some people may think it's crass to focus on politics at a time like this, but unfortunately what we've seen in the course of the last 8 days is precisely what a failure of political leadership leads to. John, tell me politically, who do you think benefits from this? Right now we're seeing a pandemic, we're seeing economic devastation, and we're seeing chaos on the streets. Who does this help come November?
I think it's too early to tell. I think people are really focusing on reality. We're still in a pandemic, right? And then we're on the cusp of opening up, but yet whether it's a large retail chain or a local small business, right? And you know, there's a lot of Black business owners that have lost their storefronts. So not only have they not had revenue for months, right? They have to now spend money to actually go through the repairs to try to open up and figuring out what level of business that they'll be able to do under the new norm.
David, who do you think this helps?
This is going to be challenging.
Politically, who does this help?
Yeah, marginally, maybe it helps Biden. He gave a decent speech the other day. He came out of the basement to give a speech in Philadelphia.
It's not about speeches, man.
He's out and about. That's good for him. But at the end of the day, this was terrible for Bill de Blasio, who has fumbled this once again, not being able to find his stance, whether it was defending the police who rammed the protesters days ago, and it's not good for Donald Trump. That photo op in which he's waving the Bible.
All right, let's forget about the photo op, David. Let me get this. Here's the situation. You have 40 million people out of work because governors and local communities refuse to open up America. So you have millions of people, while their bills are stacking up, they've lost their jobs, they're in a state of despair, and we're seeing anger in the streets. That's what we're seeing. It's not only about George Floyd. This is anger in the streets, and that is done by Democratic leadership.
Let me give David the last word here. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, Donald Trump himself has stoked the anger in the streets. One of the responsibilities of the presidency is to calm things down, not provoke more violence, which is exactly what he did.
We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. We will look forward to seeing you both next week. And look, nobody, including the angry mob that's taking over our streets, is adhering to social distancing. I think next week you should probably both be here in studio. I think we're kind of done with excuses for lack of haircuts and lack of in-studio appearances. So I do hope to see you.
As long as you have someone to groom my beard.
I will see you in person next week, I hope. We'll continue on Liquid Lunch. You're watching Biz TV. I'm Frank Moreno.